Okay, let's cover Mr. Madison's War. Now, it's kind of interesting to me. A lot of people have put videos up on this within, the short time that it's come out. And I've been very slow on it, largely because, well, I had started the Western Front down there before I got a copy of this, just barely. Production was a little slower than I thought it would be on this. Likewise, actually, with Saints in Armor up here, which I also was hoping to do fairly soon after it came out. It's kind of cool that a lot of people have put this out. Nobody's done anything on Saints in Armor, but, you know, Musket and Pike is one of those established series. I was actually kind of surprised because mostly people don't cover the CDGs the way some of the more popular things get covered, or some of the lighter, lighter games get covered. And it was kind of nice to see Marco covered it, even Joel, Eddie covered it. Both people I share the 2D6 logo with or whatever. So there's already a couple of reviews out there of it and kind of overviews of the game. I don't know how much I can terribly add to that. So when I add to that Gilbert Collins, the designer, has done some tremendous videos showing the rules at work, etc. in a demo, you know, part of me kind of says, why should I even video it? But I've played the game already, and I do really like it, and I want to do it. And, well, some people may be interested in it. And then there's also... So instead of going through the rules and going through the rule book, which probably doesn't help many people anyway except myself, since I have played this fairly recently, I'm not even going to read the rules again. So I'm liable to make some mistakes, but I am going to highlight some things that struck me initial play as kind of different, because in a lot of ways this is very much, you know, your Wilderness War type CDG. And it's a similar kind of terrain. There's definite differences in the rules. These rules are lighter than Wilderness Wars. The game ends up centering along the lakes. This is the important theater in the War of 1812. This is where the war could have been. At one point I said, this is where the war was won or lost. Well, no, it wasn't. This is where the war could have been won or lost, though. Not with the burning of Washington. Not so much with the naval actions. All right. Well, let's take a look at the map to begin with. And one of the first things you've got little borders to show who was the original owner of an area. That's important because you only get points, you only get victory points for areas that the other person owns that you capture. Okay. You also have a victory point value in each area. And you can see most of them are pretty low, but some of them get way up there. 8's for these important ports, 12 for Montreal, 20 for Quebec. Quebec's an auto victory for the U.S. in one sense. And what else do we have? We have these little... Okay, these are kind of important. These are the headwaters to the lakes. They prevent you from moving between bodies of water. So Lake Erie and Lake Huron are connected by this lake transit box. But there's headwaters breaking up the other waterways, and then Lake Champlain, I don't think needs one. You kind of give one here, just to show, hey, this isn't part of the seaway. This was kind of confusing because I expected water transport to be happening along the upper St. Lawrence. I'm a little confused why it's not. But I guess it would require extra counters and wouldn't really help much to the game. Okay. Another thing that comes out, so units have a number of different values on them, and we've got land and sea units, and we've got leaders. Particular units have a strength point value. They also have a quality value, that letter, A is best. They have a designation. Some units, larger ones, will have a step-reduced side. And you have ships, which also have a quality letter on them, and they have a type of ship. One of the most brilliant things that this game has done is all these units You see a little green dot on them. That means they come out in the first turn of the game. And the second turn, 2 green dots up here. Tremendous way of kind of inobtrusively showing a reinforcement track. Now, they spend the effort, you know, you have to tell people where things actually come in and everything, but it makes sorting the game for play really, really easy. Wonderful, wonderful little innovation. You know, I've seen things that have the number, you know, the turn number on them or whatever, which kind of helps, but that's kind of confusing. This is just a little dot. At first it was a little confusing to me, hey, why is that there? But it immediately, it stops, it doesn't intrude into your brain as you're playing, at least not mine, in the way that an extra number on the counter would. And it's much, much easier than having to flip a counter over to find something, because both sides of the counter have that dot on it. So you can sort the game and be ready to play much, much more quickly than in a lot of games. There aren't a lot of counters anyway, but, you know, I found that something I really wanted to point out, because I think that was a brilliant design. Okay. And, well, leaders have a number of values on them. They have your sort of initiative value, which or strategic value, which is going to determine this is one of your standard ops events games. Got the cards here. I want to pull out. I'm going to end up speaking a lot, it looks like. You know, where you've got your number on it. Now, these are divided by player. You share a deck, but certain players have the option to use the event and other players don't. It's a 2-player game, but some cards are for the Brits, some cards are for the Americans, some cards are split. Well, no, that's a Brit. Some cards are split so that either player can use the event. The decks are broken into years, and the way it's going to go is you have 2 turns of hands of cards, and then the rest of the deck gets set aside and you move to the next year. No shuffling in, no adding, nothing like that. Each year of the game has its own deck of cards. So there's no hand management aspect to this, because there are actually more cards than you're going to need. We have different kinds of terrain on the board. And we got a kind of nice little key that gives us all of that. So you got major roads, which only cost 1 movement point to move across. These dots are trails or tracks. They cost 2. You have forts, which we'll get into in a little bit. They're really cool in this, although not as powerful as you would think. And then there's naval bases, reinforcement spaces marked on the back on the thing. Backup naval bases, which we'll get to. That's if you lose your naval base. I'm not entirely sure what these boxes are for. You're allowed to hold cards in the game. They could be where you put those cards, and in that case, well, you know, they serve a purpose in the game. However, that's not terribly convenient. I found putting hold cards, slipping them under the map or something to be fairly good. Okay, let's see what else we got here. Oh yeah, with leaders, I didn't explain everything. You've got your normal tactical rating as well, which is going to affect your battle. And you've got, of course, the name and a rank. And the rank indicates who has to be in command. You can have subordinate commanders. And how many strength points that he can command in his stack. I think the subordinates are allowed to command troops too, though, if I recall correctly. Usually, though, that's not a big deal. The stacks don't tend to be huge armies moving around in this. Trying to remember what this little wavy. Ah, yes. Yeah, the Indians up here are able to travel on the water without being transported by a boat, which is important because it's canoes. They can't walk on water. That's important because the Indians can't get on board the main British naval assets. There's no movement point allowance on units, but units have a fixed movement point, I think 6. The exception is dragoons, which come in late in the game, and there are very few. They have an allowance of 10. Doesn't really help you because you can't. I mean, you can move them on their own and use them as some sort of screening type force, but when they're within an army, they have to move with the rest of the army. Indians have a number of restrictions on them. For example, they can't use forts, they can't be recovered. So your victory points are basically from controlling a town. In order to control a town, you have to have troops who have combat factors, strength or whatever, in total greater than the victory point value of the town. So you need a fairly large size force to control an area that's worth a decent amount of victory points. And if you don't control the area, you're just kind of camped there. Your opponent controls, the original owner controls the area. It's also possible to burn down some of these villages and get rid of them entirely through play of event cards. You also get points for controlling the lakes, and that's kind of a clever little situation where you spend one effort to do it and then you keep control basically until the opponent does. We'll see maybe how that works. Game ends by a card draw. Treaty of Ghent and Battle of New Orleans and the game. The Battle of New Orleans happens after the Treaty of Ghent, and it's kind of this weird construction where the game kind of ends based on when those cards come out. They have to be kind of the last cards played and some weird stuff like that. Let's see what else we got here. Alright. So at the beginning of the game, you do this kind of pre-war sequence, which is kind of cool. The war's not declared yet. You have a small number of cards. There's going to be the top 14 cards include the declaration of war card. And you're allowed to draw those cards and play them for their ops values to kind of position yourself for the war. And eventually then the war breaks out, and then you're playing normally. But you can't launch attacks, etc. with those cards. I believe you're able to bury those cards in your hand. If you don't like them. Like basically if you want the card, if you want the card for later after the war starts, you're allowed to slap it down. It allows you to get a jump on the opponent, but you have more restrictions on what you can do. You can't attack them. Okay. Let's take a look at the sequence of play. Well, new deck for each turn. There's a little bit of weirdness where the Treaty of Ghent gets put in the bottom of the last turn of the last year's deck to make sure the game doesn't end too early. Okay. And anything exciting here? You're allowed to hold a card, a single card back. No, 2 cards over the course of a turn. You just simply play them face down and say, this one's being held in reserve. Those are going to count against your hand limit for the next turn, so it's not like in some games where you get an automatic draw of a certain size and you get kind of a bonus for holding on to cards. These aren't resources saved. These are things that you think it's worth not doing at this point because you really do want to do them in a later turn. And there's a kind of cute thing with the naval rules, which is at the beginning of each year, if you control the lake, which you had to sail out to do originally, if you controlled the lake at the end of last year, you can sail out for free. You don't have to spend a card on it. And likewise, at the end of the year, you can sail back to your port, or you do sail back to your ports for free if you're out at the port. I don't know how much difference that really makes. You could just have the boats out there. It may give some, well, it allows you to repair the ships over the winter. I guess that's the big thing. A little mechanical action in there. You of course have naval leaders. Naval leaders can do amphibious assaults with units. Land leaders could command boats as well. It's just they're not going to be good in naval combat. Retreats are kind of an interesting situation. You're not allowed to retreat through enemy units in enemy-controlled territory. And that's kind of like your wilderness war. Hey, you could get boned, but you can't as badly in this. So what ends up happening is pretty much if you can get somewhere, you have a legitimate retreat. There's not really this feeling of if I attack there, I may be wiped out if I have to retreat, which I think is kind of an interesting view there. And yeah, I know I'm giving kind of this scattered thing. So let's take a look at the charts and tables, because I find them I found them very, very helpful when I looked at this. So here's your land combat procedure, all spelled out kind of nicely. And what you do is you add up the troops, no big shock there, combat in the same square. And you take into, and then you look at what the odds. This is a reductio ad absurdum type situation, which just gives you a modifier based on the odds. You get modifiers from other things like the leader's tactical abilities. Like in, I've seen it in a few games, but the one that I compare this to most is La Grande Guerre. Like in La Grande Guerre, you pick a unit. I think Paths of Glory does this too. You pick a unit and put it forward as your lead unit that's going to be fighting. Now this is the unit that's going to take your damage, the first damage in a round of battle. But what's important about it is its combat class more than anything else. It may also matter a little bit the type, but unit quality, for each level of class that you're better, you get a +1 on your roll. And this is where forts come in. Forts, and I don't have one open, so I'll look at this one. Oh, there's one open. Forts have a combat class, and you can use that combat class for your lead unit. So you could use worse units and improve their class by having them in a fort. Now there's some restrictions on that. When you use a fort, I don't remember what it is, like militia that's been already step loss hit can't use a fort to improve it, I think. I don't remember. There's some bonuses. Let's take a look at some of these here. Indian units have a bonus in the forests. British regulars have a bonus in clear terrain prior to 1814. You get a penalty for crossing these little arrows I didn't mention. Those are major invasion routes, not to be confused with the big arrow, which is the like transit route. You get a penalty for an amphibious invasion. And any defender in forested terrain, and most of the terrain is this forested green, there's very little clear, gets a bonus as well. It's just the Brits get a bonus in the clear up until, what, 1814. And that when it says if attacking British regulars, that means if you're the U.S. attacking British regulars, not if you are attacking British regulars. Poor choice of wording, which, you know, on the play aid. So what you do is you roll and you get a result. And the result generally causes a retreat at the ends of it. One side wins, one side loses. No big victory point gains or losses for that. Or no victory point gains and losses. But it's possible both sides take step losses and the battle just continues on as a more important battle. And you just roll and roll and roll using the modifiers. You don't have an option to retreat out of there. Okay, now naval combat's a little bit different in that the modifiers, similar kind of chart, it only uses 1 die instead of 2. The modifier is going to be based on the quality of the lead vessel and of course the leader value. But the biggest thing is how many ships you got. If you've got twice as many ships, you get a +1. Or no, if you have more ships, you have a +1. If you have twice as many, you have a +2. Also, if you have big ships like frigates, you get an additional +1. And if you're only small ships, you get a penalty against you. And then You know, it's possible for you to completely defeat the enemy there. Let's see what else we got here. Okay, supply for this game. So this is the thing that kind of really was the click for me. Playing it initially, I played this once with my wife. And it kind of fit what Joel Eddy was bringing out in his review was, you know, I just kind of didn't feel like I was doing anything too important. About halfway through the game, I noticed it felt kind of like a 30 Years' War, kind of blundering around, or Unhappy King Charles, where you've got goals, but they don't really glue together into one kind of. Actually, Unhappy King Charles does, but they don't glue together into one sort of, yeah, this is my strategy, this is what I want to do. And then I realized how fragile the English supply line is. So the Americans have supplies from here, 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 and here. And the Brits have to take all 4 of them to win the game. The British supply is, for the most part, it is only Quebec. So if you take Quebec, you win. But the line coming down from Quebec ends up just 1 square wide. That English line is cuttable anywhere. Of course, there's one little fillip to that, which is there's considered to be supply coming through to Fort St. Joseph, so you could supply this way, which means cutting the lake connection by either getting control of Lake Erie or, well, there's a lot of coastal areas, so that's kind of a problem. But basically, if the U.S. can get control of the lake, or lakes, or cut the line, the Brits are in a lot of trouble. Now, being out of supply doesn't kill you automatically, but it does have your combat strength, and that's a pretty big deal. The Brits' big advantage is that they have some big units and they can fight pretty well. You take away half their strength, it's not a slam dunk, but it does really hurt them. So the war becomes largely important over the control of these couple of lakes. Lake Champlain a little less important. Lake Huron almost unimportant unless that's the alternative supply route. And over control of this little tenuous line here. If the Americans can threaten both those things, they can probably win this game fairly easily. Not by taking Quebec. That's almost impossible. By the time you run up to Quebec, there's going to be a pile of troops coming in as reinforcements. Likewise, for the British to do their automatic victory, you know, taking all of these is hard enough. Taking Albany makes it almost impossible. And that's why it feels kind of like this blundering. There's a couple of high victory point places that you can take, Sackett Harbor, Kingston, whatever. But for the most part, most of the terrain is just kind of not terribly useful, and you can't hold it all. Points are are essentially just what you're holding. So if I'm holding a lake control, I have 2 points, but if I lose that lake, I lose those 2 points. So the victory point track is just simply a record of what's going on there. Although there are cards which add or subtract victory points based on their play, like sinking the Constitution. The Constitution, well, actually, I don't think that does it, but the Constitution generates victory points for the U.S. player. Anything else of excitement here? Okay, yeah. So, continuing with the supply, if you're in supply, you can build supply depots, which will provide supply for the rest of that year, and they also give you a bonus in terms of winter quartering. And winter quartering is a big factor because the only way you can be eliminated is, there's very few ways you can be eliminated in winter quartering. One of them is that you're in enemy territory and out of supply. So this is interesting. So the way this is worded, a unit is never removed from winter attrition unless both of the following apply. You're in enemy territory and the unit is out of supply. The unit occupies a space with a winter quartering value of 0. I think that's probably an error. I really do. I think if you're in a winter quartering area with a value of 0, no matter who you are, you're going to suffer and start taking real losses. I think that's almost an errata, and I'm not looking at the living rules to see it is. But I suspect that that's meant to be an or rather than an and. And in fact, no, this is, the design note is pretty clear about it. I remember there being an example or something that threw me off. But okay, I'll play with the rules as written. You have to be in a winter quartering area of 0 and in enemy territory and out of supply to actually be destroyed. Otherwise, you just get flipped over. I'm going to have to use 2 videos for this. Okay, well, not a lot to add to this, but we'll see. So yeah, the main factor that happens if you're out of supply, well, if you have to retreat into enemy territory, you're eliminated if you're out of supply. You can't restore your unit to the strength you're halved in combat strength. Your attrition. See, now here, reduced units that are out of supply that suffer winter attrition in enemy territory are eliminated. But the alternative is this. To me, it really struck. And the way this is worded here, 16.25 and 26, although I think I'm going to go with my initial and not that. Although the rule states both, and the design note states both, when we get down here, a unit in friendly territory that's already reduced takes no further losses. However, a unit without reduced. A 0 space cannot sustain any units in winter supply for either side. This includes the 3 spaces in Upper Canada. Land units, not leaders, are destroyed if they have to winter in one of those spaces. To me, it seems like it's meant to be an or. And there was just, maybe there was a debate over whether it should be an and or an or. But the way it's worded and everything, I feel like this is probably an error. I'm not the kind of person who likes to look up to make sure I'm playing the rules correctly. If there's some errata, if I can come up with a solution on my own, which is what I'm doing here, and if I feel like there is a doubt, I'm going to do it. So, basically, if you are out of supply in an enemy-controlled territory, enemy-controlled? Enemy territory, not enemy-controlled. You're in trouble. And if you're in a 0 space at winter, you're in trouble, where your units can actually be destroyed. That makes more sense to me, knowing the situation up there. You would not want to be here. I don't care whether or not there is a supply train there. Now, there is an exception to this, which is those depots. Those depots have a little snowflake on them that says 4. And that means that they can supply 4 extra strength points above their victory point value, because that is what you're allowed to supply. This is also your winter quartering value, as well as victory points and as well as strength required to control the area. As the winter quartering value, well, you want to have your troops within that value. And this is why you may have to build a depot. Building a depot takes a card action, so it's kind of a painful thing, but it helps you keep your larger armies in the field, or not really in the field, but it keeps you from having to spend most of your autumn turn spreading your force out. So it's actually an advantage to build these depots. They go away during the winter, though. And then we get to naval reinforcements. Naval reinforcements are kind of interesting. For the most part, there are a couple exceptions. There's some American schooners that come in automatically. But for the most part, when you get reinforcement ships, like this big list here, those aren't actual ships that just appear. What you get is instead the capability to build them. And you have to spend resource cards in order to do that. Now, somewhere or another, there's probably a list of all the things you can do with your card. You can activate the leader. You can activate units from the single space that don't include a leader. a 3 card can move a stack of 3 units. You can repair naval vessels. You can restore A and B quality units if they're in home territory by playing a card. You flip them back over to alive. You can create a supply depot and you can play as an event. Now, repair of naval vessels allows you to also build these naval vessels, and those are covered here in naval repair and naval build cost charts. Almost everything you need is on the reference card. The game is fairly simple. There are a couple of little weird new things in it. But the naval building is one of your choices because, hey, if you don't build your navy, you can't gain control of the lakes. And gaining control of the lakes for the Americans is vital for being able to cut the British supply. So if the Americans start building ships, the Brits have to start building ships, and you end up spending cards on the naval war because it trumps the land war in terms of importance. And once the naval war is decided, that'll help you decide how you're going to pursue your land war. Once ships are destroyed, they're gone. So you kind of want to win that war. And what it usually, I think, will come down to is a situation where neither side has enough actions to both decisively win the naval war, or lose it for that matter, and conduct their ground campaign. But you can't risk the ground campaign until the naval campaign is decided, except on small scale terms. For example, the Brits could deal with the Buffalo, Niagara area, burn Buffalo, stuff like that. But they may be in trouble if Lake Ontario falls, because this is their supply route. And if Ontario and Erie both fall, they are in trouble because the supply route can be cut here by the lake transit coming into Erie, and one land cut into Kingston or anywhere along this line. The English are in a lot of trouble at that point. That's one of the key issues. I have one other game on this that I covered. Very, very disappointing on this particular subject. Very disappointing game called Fury on Champlain. I did a video of it. This is a lot more fun than that on a topic that really interests me. One of the questions, of course, is Amateurs to Arms, the Clash of Arms game that came out several months before this and generated a lot of buzz. I stayed away from that, mainly because of the high price point. It got good reviews, etc. And maybe I still want to get a hold of a copy of it. Beautiful map. I had the feeling it was, from looking at it, that it looked a little lighter than this. Now, this is not a complex game, but looking online, I'm not so sure it really is as light as I thought. And Clash of Arms has a tendency to put out more complex games. From what I understand, this is the cleaner design, so this may be more applicable to more people. But I do have this desire now to take a look at Amateurs to Arms as well. But it's kind of funny, the 200th anniversary, and we see the first 2 games on the War of 1812 and forever. This was a really underappreciated contest, and this is definitely, it interested me the first time, and hopefully we'll be able to see a little bit more as I put it through the paces of a solitaire game. I'll be able to see more than you do in an opposed game. At least that's my feeling. All right, let's put this up.